Today we will learn the theory of fan spinning. We will discuss some basic ideas, terminology and other fundamentals of fan spinning. Let's go! Let's start with the grips. There are really only two grips that you need to know. The first is the open grip. It's open because my hand comes into the ring from this side to the audience, so it's kind of open to the audience. And no matter how exactly I hold my ring, like this, like so, or just keep it on my hand, it still remains open as long as it's from this side to that side. And there's opposite of that is closed grip. It's as long as hand comes to the ring from that side to this side, it remains closed. No matter how exactly I hold the fans, like so, or something like this, it's still closed grip. So each hand can have either open grip or closed grip. When we talk about move as a whole, actually one hand can be open, the other one can be closed. In this case we sometimes say it's mixed grip, meaning that one is open, the other one is closed. All other grips that you can find on the internet, they are really either not really the grips in my terminology, or very specific like tricks that we learn for very specific moves, but they are not really general grips. I mention them whenever I need to explain you some particular move, but they really are just 5% of all moves. So just focus on the open and closed grip. This brings us to what is called grip change.
Twist and flip to change my grip, essential parts indeed.
The grip change is really the change from open grip to closed grip and back. There are many ways to change your grip. For example, rotation in alternative plane, or this kind of flips, or the flops that we learned recently, or some moves that we didn't learn so far. One of the particular ways is kind of the grip change through the scissor grip, like so, and back. This one you can check in this tutorial. It's really old and funny one. Now let's discuss the classification of fan moves. For me, learning fans is like unlocking branches of the skill tree, and at the very root of this skill tree lie the basic moves. What I call the basic moves are the moves that cannot be further divided into even simpler moves. The examples of such simple moves, basic moves that is, are the simple weave or the weave with open grip. Another example is, for example, the isolation or the flap. There are other moves that we didn't learn so far. Also there are like a star. About each of these moves I already made on one or more tutorials. Simple, for example, turn, right, or toss, like so, or other kinds of tosses. All these are basic moves that can be combined together in more or less random order, and by combining them we get what we know as moves. So to say, for example, the windmill, as I like to mention, is a kind of weave backward and weave forward, and we have the windmill, right? Or any other move is just a kind of weave, now weave here, so we get this kind of flower. So as you unlock these basic moves in your own skill tree, you are kind of gaining access to more and more complicated moves. The power of these basic moves comes from the fact that you can actually grow your own skill tree by combining any basic move with any other basic move, because they all have very similar timing. 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and so on. 1 to every basic move has this timing, almost every. So you can like really combine move with one hand. For example, I will do a weave, like 1, 2, 1, 2, and like I will combine it with a toss, 1, 2, 1, 2, and so I create a new move. When we combine the moves of two fans, we must consider such things as direction, timing, and size. The direction is simple. The fans can move either the same direction, means they both rotate like clockwise, for example, or the opposite direction, means they rotate in different directions. Now as for the timing, it's a bit more complicated. When we have a same direction movement And same time means fans literally rotate the same time, the same direction. And when we have the opposite direction, the same time, opposite direction looks like this. Like fans meet at the top and at the bottom. This is what we call same time, opposite direction. And we have a second time mode, which is called split time. Split time is really looks like so in the same direction mode, means one fan is there, the other fan is there, so it's like a split time. And we have a split time for the opposite direction. It looks like this. In the split time mode, fans meet at the left and at the right, like this. This is called split time, unlike the same time, which looks like this. I hope it makes sense. There are other things like quarter time and so on, but we really almost never use it, so let's forget about it for now. But the things become a bit more complicated when we do the weaves. In the weave, we always go from one side to another, like so. So let's consider opposite direction, same time. Looks like so. It's easy. But when we want to do the split time, it will basically go like this. And it is kind of split time, opposite direction. But you can also do things a bit differently, and it will look like so. In this case, we are actually having the same time, opposite direction, but what we have is a split side. Means one hand is on one side, the other hand is on the other side of my body. So I call it like split side. And so this is split, same side, opposite direction, and this is split side, opposite direction. It's important to distinguish these two moves from what is called split time, because it looks really similar, but it's really not the same. And a little side note about the directions. In other props, we say forward and backward directions depending if the prop goes this way or that way. But in fans it doesn't make much sense, because we have two different grips which are really two parallel universes. And what is forward for one is kind of backward for the other, so it's weird. So instead we use the grip description, and then we say like the thumb is leading, so it means the movement this way. Or pinky is leading, means it is this way. Thus, to describe a move, we usually say like, oh, my right hand is open grip and it's a thumb leading, so I have this thing. And my left hand is like a close grip and, for example, thumb is leading, and I have this kind of move. So don't speak about forward and backward, rather speak about the pinky leading or thumb leading direction and the grip. Let's talk about relations. Unlike other props, fans have this complicated shape which opens many interesting possibilities. Let me introduce you the concept of relations using most common example of star. Imagine you're doing this star pattern. Basically your fan is following the cross, but depending on how do you start, it will be a bit different move. So if you start like this, it will be different. If you start like this, it will be yet another variation of this move. So when you have two fans, basically everything depends on how do you start. If you start like so, that is, your fans make a letter O, they are kind of in O relation to each other. This pattern will look like so. But if you start in this position, the fans are kind of in X relation to each other, form letter X. Then your pattern will look differently. And it goes on. If you start with kind of S relation, your pattern will look like so. And even if you, for example, you can imagine like this I relation, so your pattern will look like this. You can see that it is the same move, but done in different relations. That is, you achieve different patterns just depending on which relation you have at a certain moment of the move. It is important to understand that the concept of relations makes sense only when we speak about like the whole pattern, not about individual points of same pattern. That is, it is important how fans are related to each other at the beginning of the move, for example, but not in every other moment of the move, because it changes. For example, Imagine we are having the pattern like this. So it's not correct to say that, oh, we start with like O relation, then we go to some kind of S relation, then we go to O relation, then we go again to S relation. No, it doesn't work like this. Like obviously at every moment of the move, fans kind of are making slightly different like relation between themselves. But well, it's kind of, it doesn't mean anything. What really matters is that your initial placement and then what you get from it. Because if you consider this move, the fans sometimes like S, sometimes like O, sometimes like X, but it doesn't change the relation. The relation remains like O relation. I hope this kind of clarifies what these relations mean. It's really the modes of the same move depending on the initial position of the fans. Since we touched the subject of flowers, let me remind you what are the spin and anti-spin concepts. The spin, or any like in-spin movement, means that your fan rotates in the same direction as your hand goes. For example, here my fan goes like clockwise and the fan rotates in the same clockwise direction. So it's a spin flower. And the anti-spin flower is when they are in different directions. That is, hand moves in the opposite direction. So the anti-spin flower looks like this. It's important to also understand that, for example, 4-petal flower has only 3 turns, whereas spin flower has 4 turns. So they have a bit different timing as we discussed previously. Since we also talk about that, there is a difference between like flowers in the classical sense of like oil, double staff, and what is called stars. It's a kind of a move which is essentially the anti-spin with 2 petals, but I use it as a different class of moves because it is a very different technique to perform this move, and the final kind of impression is very different. So that's why I separate like stars and the flowers into 2 different classes of moves, even though you might argue that they are kind of similar. So that's all I wanted to explain you about the theory of fan spinning.
And if you don't agree, you can fuck off.